straggle in here, I'm sure. Thanks everybody for sitting tight through the day. All right, thank you for staying tuned. We are going to talk specifically about hemp grain production. Honored to have a great crew with us. If you guys want to just take a minute and introduce yourselves, where you're from and what, kind of how you touch hemp grain in this. Are you on YouTube?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You want to listen, so you walk in, I was hoping you would.
Thank you. Hi, Daryl. I'm standing up. I'll introduce myself. I'm Daryl McElroy with a company called Fresh Hemp Foods. We're out of Canada, Manitoba. We're, I think you'll see our products on the shelf under Manitoba Harvest. We specialize in the grain and in the food side of things, as far as hemp oil, hemp hearts, protein powders. We now come out with what's called Hemp, as our label with granola. We've got about 15% of hemp parts in the granola. We're the largest company in the world that is doing hemp food products. And here to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'm Clement DABNEY. I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota. I study the genetics of terpene production, but also while there I've done variety trials on grain, yield variety trials for grain production, as well as some double cropping studies. That's who I am.
Tyler Schoch, I'm from Schoch Farms. I just introduced myself in the last one, but still, I think the same.
I'm TONIA FARMAN with Queen of Hearts Hemp Foods and Hemp Northwest. We're a seed processor in the Dalles, Oregon, and we have a small CPG brand called Queen of Hearts.
Roger GUSSIAAS is my name. I have a business called Healthy Oilseeds out of North Dakota. We do oilseed processing, including cold press expelling, milling, sifting, roasting, and the small molded bottling. We've done a fair amount of exporting too. We've done business in 22 countries, 49 states. Not all hemp seed, but we're starting to get starting to export a fair amount of hemp seed, which is our hemp products. So that's a good thing.
All right, so we're going to move fairly quickly because the last group did touch on food and grain a little bit, and the next group in Hemp Food Coalition will keep things on track. So we're going to fly pretty high level. This is not specifically if you're looking to grow hemp grain, how much nitrogen to put into the soil and all of that. We're going to talk really quickly about kind of where the market is, where the opportunities are, and what that looks like. Before we get started, just real quick, I'd like to know kind of who's in the room. Who in the room has grown hemp for grain here? So we've got a couple hands of people, and who's interested in growing hemp for grain? Wow, that's pretty good too. And who's here just because it's the only thing that's happening right now? Till the end of the day. That's okay too. It's good to learn all different levels. So real quick history on grain production. 1998, Canada legalized hemp grain production. I think Daryl probably started right then. Yeah.
One of the first growers.
We have the OG in the room. 1999, Nutritional was founded in California. That's probably the biggest U.S.-based company for hemp foods. And then 2004 was the HIA versus DEA. That's when it was litigated over total THC content in hemp foods, and basically established that we could import these foods and that they do not contain THC. And then obviously the 2014 Farm Bill is when the pilot program started here in the States, when our growers could start playing with hemp. And then obviously the 2018 Farm Bill, full U.S. legalization, and really at the same time, on the same day, FDA announced the grass status, which Manitoba Harvest did all of the work for putting forth. And that's really a big step that really went unnoticed in the hemp world when the Farm Bill passed, because it removed some barriers that some larger companies had of using these ingredients in their products. So for those that don't know, grass is generally recognized as safe. That's the FDA's status of a normal food product. So flour, sugar, all of the things you eat every day are recognized as safe. That means we can grow them, process them, eat them, sell them without worry. Just some quick graphs just so you can see. This is all data from Canada, but this is the Canadian exports. And really I show these just so you can see that there is a market. And we're new players in the market. These guys have established the market, created the market. As Darrell said, Manitoba is the worldwide leader. Really, they've done a lot of the education in the marketplace that even allows people to have acceptability of these foods. In the peak there, you can see there was a rise up, 13, 14, 15. Darrell may be able to speak to that in more detail in a few minutes. That was kind of the Korean boom, and then a bit of a fall, and that timed as well with when the U.S. came on. So they had oversupply from some of the Korean demand, and then that falling right about the time that we came online. So interested to hear how that goes. But prior to 2014, when we started producing, we imported all these hemp seed foods. And so while we're talking about markets and CBD that we don't know what it is, fiber, we don't know where it is, we have import codes and we've tracked this stuff. So you can see that over the years, use has increased. The majority's always come from Canada. There's been some Eastern Europe, and then a rise of some Chinese product as well. Most of the good stuff comes from across the border, and that's where we're learning. I put this out, and again, we're going to go off of the presentation a little bit and get to our panel here, but one of the first things I do when we talk grain is put this up. This is the Canadian Hemp Trade Association at hemptrade.ca. That's your first resource. If you're interested in growing grain and you don't know that inside and out, that's step one. And we're not going to take your time today regurgitating what they've honed in on those points, because their production guide really is the most complete starting point. So we like to introduce that so you can go and read it, so we don't spend the time with valuable people talking about things that you can read online. So we'll go into the market a little bit, and who's your customer? We've got human food, animal food, and some industrial products. And really our panel today, Darrell probably straddles all parts because you guys are in the market with a food and in production. But we have kind of experts of each piece. So TONIA, do you want to talk a little bit about market and what it's like bringing hemp foods into the market from the consumer and market side?
Yeah, well, so we're in the Pacific Northwest, a unique cannabis-aware part of the country anyway, and it's also one of the most condensed, or I guess the parts of the country where people are most health aware. They're seeking out a really plant-based proteins, organic. They're really conscious of how their foods are grown and their connection to both farmer processing, the whole supply chain. And so being there, we are very aware of what's going on in the market, and we have a lot of options for hemp foods. In addition to Manitoba Harvest, we've got Nature's Path, which is not up there, but Nature's Path is a big hemp, actually they're out of Canada, but they are very widely promoted and throughout the Pacific Northwest. We have Bob's Red Mill, which also imports from Canada. Pacific Foods does a hemp milk, and then we've got our hemp seed oil up there. But in general, hemp seed foods are pretty small still when you look at the whole nutritional gamut of specialty nutritional foods. Hemp is still very, very small. And there is a big market in our little region of the Pacific Northwest, but what we found is people are actually a little bit confused because of the legalization of recreational cannabis. So the food side has been somewhat challenging for us for our region. But there is a growing demand, and we're finding that especially value-added foods, so bars and marinades and dressings and cereals and granolas, that's where there is potentially much more growth and getting people a lot more aware of hemp. Like, you're much more likely to eat a granola bar with hemp in it than you are to just dive right into hemp hearts. So it's really about introducing hemp hearts, which is the inside the heart of the seed, and some of these other products into the products that we already know about, enjoy, than it is to just try and push hemp seeds as an ingredient into people's lives. So We were, I would say, probably really ambitious at first, thinking that everyone would just dive into hemp foods when American farmers could start growing for it. But it wasn't like that. This is a definitely slow growth. And then, do you want me to hold off on animal food? Or do you want
Yeah,
to
we're gonna
about
talk
that?
animal
Okay.
food in the next session, so we'll save that for the Hemp Feed Coalition.
The other thing I was going to mention, because you have it up there, is the allergen-free, gluten-free is really big right now. And hemp is an allergen-free product as long as we don't bring it in with any wheat contamination. And that's a key point. I won't go into that too much because I'm sure
No, that's a
someone
good
else will.
transition, so we'll transition into Roger and processing and really that step working backwards. As a processor, you have specifications that you need, and specifically I'm going for food safety, and I've got that up there. Allergens and wheat contamination again. So for you to be able to deliver, let's say to TONIA, a food safe product that's coming out of your facility, what are you looking at in terms of food safety when you're talking to Tyler, your producer, and you guys are talking about raising this grain and bringing it in?
Well, the first thing is that we'll look at the micros and look to see if it's, it's got to be free of E. coli, and mold count's got to be low, total clay count, coliform, many things like this. Salmonella, that has to be free. I mean, of at least a couple of those, and low on others, as far as like mold, things like that. Very low. It's a little different product than, say, for example, wheat. There's a few farmers out there, you grow wheat, and there's a kill step before eating wheat. It's called bread. I mean, you're going to bake it, you're going to heat it. The heating process is killing those bad pathogens. But as far as hemp goes, you want a clean product out of the field, because you're eating a raw product. You're going to eat, most likely you're going to eat a raw product. There's pasta made from hemp, that won't be a raw product, but there is like the smoothies, things like that. You make a smoothie, you're going to take protein powder, and you want to make sure that's a clean product, and that's extremely, extremely important. So, like with the harvest side of things, you want to start drying the product. If it's a little bit wet, you want to make sure get it dried as soon as possible, as fast as possible, right off the field. Not the next morning, but that night, start the drying process by putting air on it. Another thing, you mentioned wheat. It needs to be free of wheat. We cannot accept more than 2 kernels per pound. So if you're going to follow a wheat crop, growing hemp for grain, following a wheat crop, make sure, everything's clean and your combine truck's clean, and also make sure you're not picking up any volunteer wheat that was from the year before. That's extremely important.
So Tyler, as a new producer, you're 3 years in now. When you first met with Roger and talked about food grade product, you said you guys raised, I think, 13 or 14 other crops at your farm. How is hemp different, and what learning curve was there in terms of understanding the food grade and the safety handling?
Well, hemp is different in one way for us, because where we are in western North Dakota, we get about 12 inches of precipitation, total moisture a year. So in the 80s, when the farm crisis, and I didn't grow up farming, I'm first generation, so that's a whole different concept, but just listening to old timers, in the 80s, the farm crisis kind of took care of when farming got really tough. The guys that survived in western North Dakota went to strictly no-till. The reason we do that is because without no-till, we can maybe raise 20 bushel wheat crop. With no-till, 40 to 60, because we're managing our water. We're managing the amount of water we lose by not tilling. So hemp, the most unique challenge for us, I would guess, is that in a no-till system, you have to use herbicides to control your weeds because you're not tilling. So that is an issue with hemp. There's several chemicals that work, several herbicides that will work. None of them are approved by the EPA. So the Canadians have a couple. You guys have Select, and maybe Vermoxanil is almost done. I don't know for broadleaves. I don't know about Clethodim. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But so they have some. We don't have in the U.S. And the problem is because, like someone said earlier, hemp is a small crop. It's really small potatoes compared to potatoes. So what we run into is there's not a lot of money. As a chemical company, they won't stick in the research and the cost into certifying a chemical in the United States to take care of that. So that is a challenge. We have to go into a clean field. We never follow wheat. We don't follow any similar sized grains. That would be an issue. Wheat being one of them because of gluten. Oil seeds, we put them on sunflowers before, and that works. Roger's never complained when I bring sunflowers because it's an oil seed, and I suppose it.
Easy to clean out.
Yeah, it's easy enough to clean out.
inseparable.
Yeah. So that is an issue. I guess otherwise, as far as food safety, we make sure when we pull it off, and like I said in the last, is there anyone who wasn't in here last time? Okay, perfect. So you guys all know our process when we come off the field, right away to drying, right away to separating, right away to trying to make sure that we get that as dry as possible so we don't have mold. This year in 2019, we got more rain in September than we normally get all year, and we had harvested like 500 bushels the day before it started raining, and that was all waste. So we took 500 bushels and fed it because it was moldy, and when we got rain for about 40 days, every other day it rained, even with the bin fans on, because we can't use heat to dry, you can't save it. It was too wet coming off, it's waste.
Darrell, obviously we're just learning, and Tyler's got 3 years. That makes him an expert American hemp grain farmer. But you guys have 20 plus years learning these same things, and really you guys learn the hard way, trial and error, that establish the standards that we're all learning and have access to in this production guide. You want to talk about maybe a little bit of the historical learning curve of how you guys got to the point where we can look at a set of microbe stands and say, this is what's considered food grade, and we know how to produce?
Well, first of all, we had some really good advice from the Ukrainians and from France back in those days. That's actually where the seed came from. When we first started growing in Canada, they had some excellent advice as far as when you say leaving, we did about maybe 200 bushels one day, the first day, by the time we got everything all set up and whatever. Next morning it was hot, so it was just, you have to get it on air, you have to get it on a little bit of heat would be great too. We use great grain dryers. Yeah, for sure, but you have to keep the heat low. That was, between combines burning and dryers burning there that first couple of years. It was pretty, but that was really important lesson to learn, to get your grain dried down as quick as you can because of the microbes and the molds and stuff that will get in there. That's critical. Probably some of the best stuff we have, the guys will even screen it too. So as soon as it comes off the combine, they'll put it through a rotor screener, something like with your corn screener. Of course, they change the screen size, but it just takes a little bit of the larger bits of herds and the fiber that's left in there, and the small little weed seeds, if there is any in there, and that also, those are all places or hosts where microbes can multiply. But it's very important to get it done, for sure.
And so they're doing that prior to even putting it on air into the bin. They're doing a cleaning process.
Well, we'll watch what we say as far as a cleaning process. It's just a rough screening.
Yeah.
There's no aspiration. There's nothing going on like that. It just is strictly a rotor screener.
And in the early years, did you guys have the food safety testing, or were you just growing it and putting it out? Were you aware of the quality that was coming out? And what was the learning curve like to get to where we are now?
More on the growing side of things, but I know as time has gone on, that has become more and more stringent as it's moved on. Certainly, yes, we did do a lot of we did do some tests and stuff when it first came out. I don't recall anybody other than maybe a E. coli positive test that was ever turned down in the early years because of high microbes or high bacteria counts, but certainly that happens now. One of the things that we did put in our plant here and just started up this past fall was a pasteurization process.
Is that for finished product, or?
That goes, all of our grain goes there before it goes through our plant.
Oh, really? So on the way in, the
Yeah.
grain is getting pasteurized.
So it's already got cleaned, it comes in from the cleaners, it's up to our cleaning standards, 99.9, and then and then we test it again to make sure nothing happened in transit as far as the truck being contaminated or whatever, and then it goes into a pasteurization process.
And are you running 100% of the grain that you get, even if the labs are good?
Yep.
So you've got
yeah, because we want a standard,
Yeah.
right? We don't want it all over the place. We want it to get standardized, saying, okay, this is what you want, this is what you're going to get.
And is that a heat pressure, like typical pasteurization, or?
It's more a little bit of steam involved there too, yeah.
But nothing that, you're not affecting the nutrition in the
No,
grain by
no,
getting
we
it?
did, where did we do tests? Yeah, to get that.
Because you get it hot enough to
proper
kill
timing,
all the
proper temperature,
microbes,
yes.
but-
Without affecting that, oil content or the, or the protein or, just to make sure we didn't have a mush at the end of the day.
Gotcha. Clement, talk a little bit, if you can, because you've grown hemp grain here in Minnesota. I think a lot of guys are here in Minnesota. And what have you guys done and what have you learned that can help these guys kind of get into hemp grain and get into market?
So what we did in 2017 is we did a randomized complete blocking design study at 5 locations around the state, St. Paul, White Earth Nation, Crookston, Morris, and Rosemount. We grew 12 different Canadian grain varieties. Most of them were grain varieties. We had some dual purpose varieties in there like Anka. Kind of what we learned, we had so some of the caveats of our study is we had a hard harvest date. So we harvested everything at 105 days after planting. Some varieties like a Finola, which is a shorter, very early flowering variety, that really didn't do so well in our trial. Oftentimes at Rosemount, where we had large weed pressures, it would get outcompeted by the weeds because Finola is a much shorter variety. So there were some caveats in our study, but the takeaway from us was that X59 was the highest yielder in all locations trialed, followed by CRS1 and CANMA. We thought Anka was about 800 pounds of grain per acre, but also produces pretty long fibers when planted early enough. That year of 2017, we planted in the St. Paul location in early June, as well as 3 weeks later in later June. We found a significant yield reduction with that later planting date of late June. In 2018, we did a double cropping or relay cropping study with X59 and it's blanking on there now. Pennycress. So basically, we planted pennycress in the fall, harvested it early summer, and then planted hemp directly into pennycress beds, as well as we kind of we also had a control treatment where we did a conventional planting of the X59. We did see a pretty significant yield reduction in the double cropping experiment. So planting it late after pennycress decreased the yield of the hemp. But then you kind of also have to think about it. You're now getting 2 crops. You're also maintaining your soil health. You're not getting the erosion because your fields aren't fallow. Our 2017 study can be found at the Minnesota Department of Ag website if you want to take a peek at how we designed it and the rest of the findings in it. So I'd recommend growers look at what different varieties are out there. I know that another thing we had done was we looked at, so our lab is mainly, the Weibelin lab at the University of Minnesota is mainly a genetics lab. Our bread and butter is using a CAPS assay to look at the genes, the cannabinoid genes that are in cannabis plants. And we did find some interesting findings in that about 25% of it was Piccolo and Grandi had THC alleles in that population, so about 1 in 4 of individuals in the whole populations had THC alleles. So if you look at them per plant, you could find hot plants in there. So that's kind of one thing that you're going to want to look at while you're trying to buy seed, is making sure you're buying varieties that won't go hot, which was kind of surprising for certified seed varieties, that there were some lines in there that have this THC allele floating in the population.
Which certification? Was it ASCA certified, or which certifying agency for the seeds?
Well, it came through, we actually have 3 different certifications, most
Oh,
through the
from
CFIA,
Okay.
Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
That's
They're
right,
the
'cause
one
it's
that would inspect
international.
it. They just supply the APHIS and but yeah, they're the ones that do the testing, and as far as in the field goes, and do the THC testing, and then that seed that comes off goes through the whole process through the Canadian, through the CFIA mostly.
And are those varieties that you mentioned that showed those, you said allele, THC allele? or whatever? Just science talk over my head.
Okay,
Some
yeah.
sort of marker
Basically,
gene,
they,
right?
they have a non-functional CBA synthase they make that allows them to make THC.
And are those varieties that are on the Canadian exempt list? So that's known, but they've been proven through all the provinces to be.
When you take, so kind of in the law of averages, in Minnesota, you have Margaret or whoever is working for her will go out to the field, grab 30 different plants, chop 3 inches, homogenize those samples together. Just due to the law of averages, you almost always will not go hot. But there are hot, if you were just to grab a plant, there are hot plants in your field for certain varieties.
And that's what we do up in Canada. We take 30 pounds throughout the field and same thing, homogenize it, dry it, homogenize it, and send it in for testing to the it up.
And for exempt varieties, most of your growers, if they're buying a known certified exempt variety, they're THC test exempt,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
So from a competitive standpoint, for American growers, it's a bit of a barrier because we have, I'd say in most states, you're talking $800 to $1,500–$1,600 in licenses and THC testing, and I know where we're at, you have to pay the mileage of the tester to go around. So it's just something to think about when we're looking at the markets, that we're not quite at a point where it's even a fair playing field. We pay a lot to get good known seed. It's recommended to grow good known seed because, especially given the new USDA regs, and we've got some challenges. Roger, talk real quick if you can. If you're meeting a first-time grower and talking to them about growing hemp here, what are you looking for? What kind of conversation are you having with that grower?
Well, a lot of times, I mean, I just want to ask them about rotation and ask the grower, you know, what kind of rotation, what crop would you put it on, and the advantages and disadvantages following certain crops. I will ask them about that. Like, for example, if you're following a broadleaf, you might have some problems with sclerotinia, a white mold, and then also if you're following wheat, you know, make sure that you don't have any wheat. And we talked about that already. I mean, wheat in with the sample. Or with the grain that you're harvesting. Those are important things. Also, I guess a first-time grower, I want to make sure that they're not growing a lot of, I mean, I'd like to see them, there's been people who have talked to me and said, I want to do 1,000 acres right off the bat, and I just said, you know, probably start with 100 acres, something like that. I'd like to have them see at least 40 acres because it's, all the testing that needs to be done, you have to be able to, the micros testing, things like that. You want to make sure, I don't want to, I mean, it's hard to buy a tote or a few bags of hemp grain, and you have to do a $200, $150 or $200 test on it. So that's
We know all about that.
Yeah, that's right. We do a lot of testing, and but that's I wanted to talk to them and speak for the heart, and I want to. I don't want to try to talk them into it. I'm going to give them the goods and the bads both of growing this crop, and as Tyler can add to that, I'm sure a lot, that the good and the bad, as far as it's not all easy crop to grow. There's harvest problems that can be and things like that.
That's a good handoff, and let me touch Tyler and then come back because I want you to kind of close it out with.
Well,
that.
I just wanted to add to
Yeah,
that.
add to it.
I guess back in the day when we first started growing it, and then I started working with the company right away, but that was one of the first things we'd ask is how much can you afford to lose?
And I want to ask some more production and contract stuff, come back to you, but Tyler, if you can kind of touch on where Roger was, what did you learn in the field and what are the really hard lessons, either whether it's planting or harvesting? We don't have a lot of time, but.
Well, what I think is, I guess exactly what you just said. How much money are you willing to lose? How much can you? I think, you know, I've seen going to, and I don't go to a lot of these. I really don't, and I don't go to a lot. But I've done some at the state level where we've had conferences at the state where we've had to kind of go. They kind of told you if you're going to grow, you better show up. So them kind of deals, and I think if you're doing it to save the farm, it's not a good idea. I mean, that's the one thing I can tell you is that if you're not willing to, and I talked about it in my last talk a little bit, if your banker can't look at your operation and say, hey, you know, you can afford to get a $0 from this crop and stick, you know, in my area. Well, when I first started, we were paying the state $25 an acre. You talk seed at $100 an acre. You start talking all these costs. I mean, you know, by the time you paid rent, fertilizer, we still do, because we're no-till, we still do, or if you're tillage, either way, it costs money to take care of your weeds before and after. So those costs are fixed costs, and then after that, I mean, none of us in here, for farmers, sometimes we go to work for free, but if you go to work for somebody else, you're not gonna sit there for 80 hours on the tractor and let them pay you $0. And I think a lot of times as farmers, we value our labor at $0. We don't factor that into what we're doing. So I think that's really important. I think you need to look at what the most commonly grown crop is in your area, and you need to do the economics on that, and then you need to figure that hemp, you might have to sit on it for a year, you might sit on it for 6 months, you might get it sold in 2 weeks, but at the same time, if you gotta sit on that for a year because the processor's not ready, or because you think you can get a better price somewhere else, so you're shopping, or whatever the case is, those are all factors. The next thing that we factor in that we don't factor into anything else, we figure equipment costs and repairs into our normal equipment, you know, as kind of a fixed variable. It's pretty easy to figure out. With hemp, we never do, because in combines, we just about burned them down. We've wrecked feeder house chains. We've wrecked, we tried a stripper head this year. We stripped some hemp. You know, it worked okay. That's a process if somebody wants to talk about later, we can talk about, but it's bearings in them and time to tear them apart. Bearings all over the side of your combine, wherever there's a shaft that's rotating, it's going to pick up that hemp, because once you shred that, it'll just wrap around everything. And then you start bearings and you burn bearings out. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. And I think one thing that is another thing, and we're talking about this year, I farm with my brother, so me and my brother 50-50, and we both have outside jobs just to kind of pay for the farm, because farming's hard. So I think that a lot of that is, when we start talking combines, we talk the amount of money extra that we got to figure in per acre just to cover that. And then we don't have problems probably for the first 40 or 50 acres, because the machines are built good enough that you can kind of wrap a lot of stuff inside of them. But once you get over that level, well, then
It starts
you
on
start
fire.
fires and you burn berries down. And,
Yeah.
and you can smell it, I'll tell you what, it's, you know. So, and I think that from that aspect, you need to be prepared to go in this. If you take all your equipment to town and have it repaired, probably don't grow hemp. If you don't know how to turn a wrench, don't grow hemp. And that's the realism of this deal. If you don't have, because it's a hard, and I'm not trying to shy anybody away, because there is some profit in it if it works. And there's money to be made. But at the same time, like, if you like cutting your corn and driving 5 miles to the elevator and dropping it off and getting the check in 2 days, or that day if you need it, it's really not that process. It's not. It's a specialty deal, and there's a lot of different caveats that go with that.
That's a perfect transition, because I wanted to bring it back to Darrell. As the largest hemp food company in the world, you guys have probably contracted more hemp, and maybe speak to that opportunities. And I know specifically with you guys and the rest of the market, everybody's looking for organic, right? So speak about the difference in what Manitoba being, or Hemp Fresh Foods being the largest manufacturer, what kind of opportunities exist for farmers within a range?
Well, okay, well, I'm going to talk about our industry for a minute, for just a second. Just like, as far as our company, we tracked around 40,000 acres per year. So certainly there's farmers bigger than that, you know, that much. And about, I guess probably 6 years ago, 10% that would have been organic. Now it's this year, for the first time, we're going to have more organic than we're going to have conventional. All of our conventional acres are already taken up. A lot of our production is done under irrigation in Alberta. Takes one of the factors away. And we have some really good farmers out. They've been growing it for a number of years. But still, you know, when you talk about the size of the industry and how small it is, really, it's and how hard it is. Like, we've been into it for 20 years, and now we got around 16,000 shells, I guess, and on shelf space, and we do our, we export to other countries and stuff too. But still, it's been a long, hard haul. As far as the organic goes, yeah, we're still, we're contracted right now around $1.05 per basis clean seed.
And are there opportunities for Midwest farmers that are within
for sure.
range?
Just to give you a little bit of an idea, we contract all the way out in Canada, as far as I guess mid-eastern Quebec.
Oh wow!
We'll go out that far. and of course all the way out to the Rockies. And now that you guys have started opening up down here, we certainly are starting to do our circle. Don't want to step on your toes, right? Make sure that for sure. But still, that's yeah, we're looking.
Roger, you want to speak to?
Oh, I was just gonna add to the market, you know, we're talking food, human food mostly, but there's this one thing, and we're gonna talk about animal feed in the next panel, and I'll just touch on it, is that there are other markets for grain. So the animal market is potentially huge. We know currently that a lot of hemp seed oil and seed cake is kind of going into that market right now, even though it's not officially recognized as a feed yet in the United States. But a lot of hemp seed oil that we press, and I'm sure that from Roger too, and seed cake is starting to go into those markets. So, and then there's other markets as well. I mean, we haven't even touched on the CBD carrier oils. Hemp seed oil is a fantastic carrier oil. Is going into skincare products, cosmetics. So we're kind of talking specifically food, but there are many other markets, and that's the thing. There's a lot of growth opportunities for grain, and also we'd like to get the farmers paid more so that farmers want to grow for grain, and possibly maybe it's a dual crop with fiber. We're not quite there yet, but we don't want to paint it completely all bad news, but right now we're still young. It's still young in the world of markets, and hopefully those markets will open up, and then export markets as well.
Roger, what about other domestic opportunities? Obviously, Hemp Fresh Foods is looking for organic, but they've got all their local Canadian growers growing their conventional. What other opportunities are available in the Midwest? And I don't know if you guys have opportunities, or what other processors could Midwest farmers connect to and work with?
Well, on the food side of things, I mean, there's just it's growing, but it's slowly growing. And I know this next session you're going to get into it, but as far as a feed for horses or a supplement for horses, it's almost like a magic potion. I shouldn't say this. I probably shouldn't say it this way, but it's just it's something that really does just wonders for horses. It's good for their stomach. They have some ulcer problems, and it's good for hair and skin, joints, things like that. For an older horse, it just does wonders. And I think that I mean I've heard many other things that is cured and taken care of, and it's quite an incredible product, and I think we're going to see a lot of things that's going to help us as humans eating the protein and the oil, having a spoonful of oil every morning or something like that, because it's such a well-balanced omega type oil, high in alpha-linoleic acid and gamma-linoleic acid. So a lot of opportunity. I think you're going to find a lot of good things. It's more and more all the time, good things. Ways it's going to help people.
In terms of, and we're going to wrap up here in a second, we'll talk hemp feed here, and we want to leave it a couple minutes for questions as well. That's why we're kind of going quick. But in terms of production opportunities, contracts, are there opportunities for conventional grain in North Dakota, or are you all booked up?
No, we have contracts available yet, and if you look at somebody that does in Minnesota might do the same thing, University of Minnesota, but there's spreadsheets available that will give you, put your own numbers in as far as, and you're going to see what how much return there is on several different crops. There's about 10 different crops NDSU, North Dakota State University, puts out there, but there's also, you can add your own crops, and hemp is not one that they've done a analysis on, but hemp, if you take that average yield and you multiply it times the market price, it's one of the most, if not the most, highest return crop there is in this part of the country. I think there's great opportunity, and that's organic and conventional. It can work very good both ways, raising it. You're going to raise it, pretty much raise it even if it's conventional crop, you're gonna raise it organically, you're not gonna apply pesticide on it, but you might apply some fertilizer.
I want to leave a moment for questions, but I just want to hit real quick. Other options for Midwest producers. I know Chad at Victory Hemp Foods in Kentucky sources grain from the Midwest. At times there's opportunity there. And as well, I know Colorado Hemp Works even brings grain from Minnesota, North Dakota at times as well. So there's a few opportunities, and I'll get your question in just a second. And one thing we didn't touch on, and I want to explain why we didn't touch on it, we didn't touch on seed and sourcing seed and all of that, because really, if you're going to grow for grain, you're going to have a conversation with whoever you're going to work with. And if you're working with Darrell, they've got varieties that they're going to recommend that are going to work. You're going to work with Roger, he's got access to varieties. And really, one of the benefits of the grain market is there are contracts available for grain. There is an existing market. These guys have done all the work for 20 years to get on the Costco shelves, get into the Targets and the Walmarts, so that people know what hemp foods is. Don't quote me on this exactly, but I heard data not that long ago that less than half of 1% of Americans even know that hemp foods exist or are eating them. And yet we import 65% of the total production in Canada. So we're talking opportunity on different scale. There's production opportunities and the ability to get contracts, but really this whole industry, we have a huge opportunity because we're not even at 1% acknowledgement in the country yet, which means that if we get to the point where 1% of the American population even knows that hemp foods exist, we've doubled our market at 1%. Carol's been working for 20 years to get to this point. So the best way, and then we'll take some questions, the best way, and I would say this for all of hemp, and this is my personal, but the best way to support growers for hemp grain or growers for hemp fiber is eat hemp, wear hemp, buy hemp products. We need to drive these markets. So the more hemp you buy, let's just see in here. Who in here has eaten hemp within the last 48 hours? Okay, but everybody wants to grow it and get paid for it. Okay, who's eaten corn within the last 48 hours? Okay, you guys are all starving, right? Or you're not playing along?
Everything has corn.
Well, you can see the difference, right? If you guys want to be successful hemp farmers and you want to support the hemp industry, you need to get out there and buy and eat hemp. I mean, that's what it comes to. Question?
When we talk about other parts of the country buying in bulk, and it's a relatively new industry out here in Minnesota. It's really been focused on CBD, and farmers are going to eventually slowly switch over. But that experimental time where you're recommending 5, 10, up to whatever amount of acres to start with, is there an avenue for a cooperative model again where multiple farmers could go together to make that transportation profitable to actually have to move it? Are you guys working with any kind of cooperative models, or is it really single source seed when you purchase?
Yeah, please.
We haven't worked. We're not a cooperative, and I definitely consider something like that. If visit with anybody, my mind's open that whatever I visit with anybody about an idea of some kind. As far as farmers working together, a lot of times it doesn't work out well for the reason that if one farmer delivers, you have to have micros done on each sample, and so it doesn't work out to commingle or to blend the grain.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Makes sense, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, it's Roger, is that right? Is there some research that has come out to show the benefit of your feed product to particularly the thoroughbred industry, I'm thinking?
I think they'll talk about that next session, but we're jumping the gun a little bit on this. It's supposed to be, it could be used as a supplement, but not as a feed. But I think they are being fed as supplements, small quantities, and people have seen huge improvements with their horses. But it needs to be approved, and the Hemp Feed Coalition is working on that. Greg, you're a member of that, right?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
a lot of us are. Yeah, they're going to be up next, so we'll save the feed, and we actually need to wrap up and get back on track and get them on here, and then we'll talk all feed for an hour because it is an exciting topic, and it really is a good follow to this because it drives the market. I know in Canada they have approved for equine for supplements. We've seen something about that, so we know that it's safe We know it's effective. We need to jump through all the regulatory hurdles that Hunter's going to talk about and educate us. Anybody else before we wrap it up? Anything on grain production or anything? We've got a great panel here. Take advantage of the opportunity to ask them, or most of us will be around for the next couple of days, and you can have one-on-one conversations as well. Yeah.
How much sampling is done per pound of product? You know, is it just for every 100 pounds? You're gonna take a sample every 1,000 pounds?
Are you meaning specifically for the safety, the food safety
Yeah, for the
stuff?
safety.
So the question was how often in the sampling and how much frequency or in lot size? Roger, you want to speak to that?
We sample, before the product comes into us, we want the farmer to send a sample, and starting with a clean bag or pail or anything like that. It's got to be very clean though. We don't want them touching with their hands because of some contamination that could happen potentially. And then we do sampling when the product's in then. We do probing of the trucks and sample from there.
Is that similar for you guys?
Yeah, somewhat. We'll have a talk with the farmer, and we certainly go through all that, what we're talking about, the food safety and making sure that, because E. coli can happen from anywhere really. That's a huge problem. But so a representative sample though, as it's coming off the truck, you're doing it every 5 minutes or whatever. We actually even encourage, it's a good agricultural collection practices it's called, where we actually put a group of farmers, our farmers that we have contract with, we'll make them go and sit through a full day course on good collection practices.
We did this.
So,
I'm sorry.
Well, so part of that is the sampling, and if you could get whoever you're working with or whoever you're working for you, get them to, time it, date it, and your initial at every load actually is what they do, and then they actually you get them to do that when it goes onto the truck to go to the cleaner. Then it's another sample's taken, and it sits at the cleaner until that sample comes in and tests okay, and then it cleans it, and then they ship another sample to us to get tested. And then, like I said, from then it goes in the truck, and it sits in our bin until we test it again. And then from there it goes through our process. So it's really rigorously tested for sure. Whether or not every 100 pounds, it's all done by time. So it's, if you want a good representative sample as a farm, on a farm, you want to do it very often. You just don't want to do one, or you certainly don't want to take it out of your auger port and your bin, because what runs around there, the rodents and whatnot, right? So, it's the more we explain it, as far as the heat process or the lack of heat kill zone, the more the farmer gets it. It's been quite a learning curve for our farmers for sure. Even stepping in a bin, walking across the yard, got a couple of dogs who knows where you stopped, step into that bin, problems.
And this might be different for both of you guys, because I think you guys have in-house testing for a lot of this. Yeah, who's paying for this? Is the processor or the grower?
Processor.
Processor. So you're incurring the costs on behalf of the grower, and that's why you're establishing minimum lot size of a full truckload.
That's right.
Because you're taking on that cost to bring it in.
We also did training this year, good agricultural practices. My sister works with us in our business right here in front row. A much older sister. No, she's my sister. She got the GAP training. Got a day at GAP training. Agricultural practices was a really good thing.
And was that successful for your growers? I know that's something that we are looking at. One thing we realize is that most grain farmers, wheat farmers in our area, up in the west, they never had to worry about these things before. They can walk in their bins. You see them standing in the trucks and running their hands through things. And really, there's an education for that needs to be implemented, because it's almost, for our U.S. FSMA training, it's more your produce training than grain. It's almost like adapting produce handling for grain farmers.
Absolutely right there. Yes.
And it's a raw product, so we are pressing it, it's raw. As a hulled hemp seed, it's raw. It is a raw product all the way to market.
Yeah, basically what you're taking out of your bin, you're feeding it to your kids.
Yeah.
That's way, or your grandkids.
Probably the biggest crux, I would think that, and we'll finish on that, that growers are learning is that it is different than other grains, even though you get to harvest it with a combine. And learning that. Any other points that you guys feel we missed? We got to move on to the next group. Anybody have a burning thing that I didn't get to for you?
Not on the food side.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. Thanks to our panel. And